I'm Karl Robb.
And I'm Angela Robb.
John Ball is a friend of ours. We've known for over 25 years.
John's had young onset Parkinson's for over 40 years, and he's a veteran,
An advocate,
and a marathoner,
a fundraiser.
and just an all-around great guy.
I think you're really going to enjoy his stories. John, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Well, we've already had for everybody watching, we've already had a great discussion already. So we're probably gonna repeat some of that just so everybody can hear what you guys were talking about as we got started.
John, you and I have known each other for a while. I think we met in Washington, I guess. I
think it was you guys went to the first PAN forum, right? Were you
I think I missed the very first PAN forum, but I was at one in 1998, I think, or 1997 maybe. The second one I was at, or the third. Actually, I went to one that wasn't even a PAN forum. It was two guys, one from the West Coast and one from the East Coast, that got together when PAN actually didn't have a forum one year. These two guys, one of them is, I can't think of either of their names right. Sid Levin and I can't remember the guy's name from Virginia, Northern Virginia.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm thinking it is the guy.
Yeah.
He's been around until just recently. I think he may have passed last year.
Okay.
It'll come to me. Yes. You know, he was active.
Joan Samuelson was out one year. They put together a PAN conference, and it was not quite PAN, but it was close. And then the following year, then Michael J. Fox showed up, and that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
I remember shaking his hand at that event.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to join us today, and I'm glad we can get to catch up. You're a veteran, and we have lots of friends. Actually, we were talking to some friends the other day. We're exposed to TCE.
And at one of the forts.
Yeah.
And but then we also have a good friend who's boxes with Karl, who was a Marine that served in Vietnam and was exposed to Agent Orange too.
There was a guy that I met early on in my advocacy role. His name was Davis. What was this? Oh, can't think of his last name right now. But he was one of the first guys. Well, the first time I attended, let me back up. The first time I attended a Parkinson's Action Network meeting in Washington, D.C., there were about 45 advocates in a room. And I went around, and there were 5 of them that were former military, and most of them were in aviation. When you figure that 5 guys out of 45 people that have come from all over the country, 5 out of 45 are former military aviators, there's got to be some reason that this intense concentration of people from that particular realm of experience. I think that a lot of us at that point were former Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange. And although there's no way that I can actually detail, the relationship, because it's how many times you're being exposed to what throughout the course of your life. There's, but I think the intense number, the high frequency of people with Parkinson's who experience that makes it the correlation, if not a causal relationship.
And which arm of the service were you
I was
in?
actually a Navy pilot. I flew transport planes in and out. I was actually flying medical evacuation missions from the Philippines into the in-country, into Vietnam, and then taking people back to the Philippines or other hospital facilities.
Wow.
Now, were you drafted, or were you already in the service?
No, actually, I went into the Navy as a result of, I took a scholarship out of high school that got me to the University of Washington, and all I had to do was go through ROTC and spend summers on on cruise with the Navy. It was called the Holloway program. It was actually $50 a month and books and tuition. And I got my 4-year degree, and I got my Navy commission the day I graduated from college. So I went to flight school from there and enjoyed it very much.
Where were you? Where were your
My
stations?
primary role was 2 years in the Philippines, flying in and out of Vietnam and all of Southeast Asia, actually. I was fortunate that I was a bachelor at the time. And so I was the only bachelor pilot stationed in the Philippines. So I was constantly being called to long-term temporary assignments throughout the Southeast Asia. I spent 3 months in Jakarta, Indonesia, flying for the American Embassy.
Wow.
That was terribly exciting.
I bet.
Of course, I learned later that that year, 1968, that I spent in Indonesia was the year of living dangerously. There was a movie made called The Year of Living Dangerously.
Yeah.
It was about living in Indonesia as an American in 1968.
How much did they pay you for the film?
I didn't know I was in that much danger at the time.
Oh, gee. Wow.
But I also got to spend 2 months in Taiwan and a couple months in Hong Kong.
Wow.
Got to see a heck of a lot of Southeast Asia, that's for sure.
You saw a lot more than most Americans ever seen of that part of the world.
Yes, I think so.
Well, and at that time, that was an interesting time to be there too.
Well, after I got out of the service, I decided to see the other half of the world. So I bought a ticket to let me think for a second. Portugal. I went to Lisbon. It was when I looked at the map in the map room, the closest that the European continent gets to the American continent was in Portugal. So I just bought a ticket to Lisbon, and I spent a year traveling on a motorcycle and hitchhiking all around Europe.
Oh,
So
wow.
I went to Asia for 2 years, and then I got to see Europe and North Africa for a year. And then I came back and started graduate school.
Wow.
And what's your field of study?
English lit.
Oh, now I know why you and Karl get along so well.
Well, I married my wife, actually. She and I ended up in graduate school together at Cal State LA. And, I met her there, and we got married. The rest is history, as they say.
And you ended up writing 2 books.
Yeah, I nobody reads the second one, but the first one's been very popular. I have no idea what my total sales are, but I know it's somewhere over 5,000 books have been printed. That's
really. Do you want to mention the titles of your books?
Yeah, the first one was Living Well, Running Hard: Lessons Learned from Living with Parkinson's Disease. What happened was I had, after I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 1983, I went out for a run the next morning. I felt so good. Actually, I felt so good because I'd been given Cinemet to see what it would do for me. Took the first tablet I felt so much better. Went out for a run the next morning, and then from that, I eventually decided to run a marathon, which was the LA Marathon. And while preparing to run that marathon, I started keeping notes. I started taking journal entries about preparing for the marathon. Mm. That turned into an article for the national publication, the National Parkinson's Foundation newsletter. It was a quarterly publication. Mm. So I got my story about running the marathon published in there, and that gave me a reason to show up at support group meetings because I had something to talk about. And so I started I had been diagnosed 12 years earlier. So for the first 8 or 10 years, I just had my head down, going to work every day, trying to raise my kids and family, owning a home, just doing all the things people do just to get ahead in life. Sure. And then when I started running the marathon, I suddenly thought I had something to share with the Parkinson's community. So I started attending support groups and talking about the marathon and what it was doing for me. And that led me to actually write the book about Parkinson's, because I had a young lady at work one day asked me, why did I get Parkinson's? And I said, I don't know why I got Parkinson's. Nobody knows why you get Parkinson's. I mean, it may be Agent Orange, or it may be genetics, or it may be paraquat, or it may be any number of things, but nobody knows. She said, I know why you got Parkinson's. And I said, well, she was not a scientist, and she was not but she said, I know why you got Parkinson's. And I said, well, why? And she said, because you're going to do something about it. Mm. And I thought, that's cool.
That is cool.
But what can I do about it? The answer was, my wife and I and a friend, Mary Yost, got together and decided to create a team around the marathon. The LA Marathon was famous for having a lot of charities that were official charities of the marathon. Hmm. And so we decided we'd put a bid in to be a charity for Parkinson's disease. And the NPF was too busy. The APDA was not interested. Nobody had ever tried making a marathon team out of Parkinson's. So Mary and I and a bunch of friends got together in her living room in Santa Monica in December 1999. And in March of 2000, we were an official charity of the LA Marathon, and we raised close to $50,000.
Wow, that's so awesome.
That's
we had borrowed the charter from the New York Unity Walk as our starting point. Mm-hmm. And Carol Walton, who had just been hired by Marty Tuchman to start the Parkinson Alliance, we used their 501c3 number to become Team Parkinson. Mm-hmm. So what I decided was that if I'm going to do something about Parkinson's, let's do it around running the marathon, because it's a great metaphor for living with Parkinson's disease.
Sure.
You got to prepare. You got to be ready. You got to have a goal. You got to, there's a lot that goes into running a marathon. You don't just step out on the track and decide to do 26.2 miles. So we took that effort that goes into preparing, and we took that effort and made it pay off, in the sense that if you're going to run for something that far or that important to you, it ought to be important to other people in your family and your friends. So it's a great fundraising opportunity. So we took the idea that if Mary's going to train for a marathon, she wants to make it pay off in the long run, and she did. And so we formed Team Parkinson, and within the first 3 or 4 years, we had raised we went from $50,000 to $60,000 the next time, and then $100,000, and eventually, in the last 20 years, we've actually been able to donate over $3 million to Parkinson's disease research.
That's amazing. That's great.
And we've had over 30 people with Parkinson's actually finish a full marathon.
Wow. Well, I often say Parkinson's is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're an example of the marathon part. So,
well, yeah. The funny thing is that, I mean, I had a friend who was diagnosed around the same time I was, and he was told, go home and find a comfortable chair. I didn't like that idea. Yeah, he's long gone. I went home and went for a run the next morning. And it's made a huge difference in my life.
And to date, how many marathons have you run?
I've run more than 25 marathons. I lost count someplace along the line because there were some that I did as team members, some that I did as part of a relay effort. But I finished at least 25 full marathons and at least finished one ultra marathon.
How long was that?
50K, 50 kilometers.
Wow.
A marathon is 42 kilometers, so it was just another hour added after the marathon was over.
Oh, just another hour while you're out there.
Actually, when I came across the 26-mile marker, I thought, damn, I got more than an hour to go. That was a lot of work. So I finished as 42, or the 50 kilometers. I finished in under 7 hours. So I got my name in the book.
That's amazing.
I've
walked a half, and that was enough. It was.
Well, the last race we had for Team Parkinson before the COVID-19 shutdown was in fact about 3 days before the shutdown.
Wow.
It was March 8th of 2019 or 2020. And I did the half marathon at that point. I did it was about a 3.5 hour effort. It was very slow. It was my slowest ever, but it was the first time I ever finished first in my age group. So
yay!
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was in the 75 plus.
Well, it sounded. I walked the Baltimore half marathon, and every time I passed somebody, they're like, "There's only one more hill to go," and I knew they were lying to me. Don't keep telling me it's the last one. It was literally a lot of hills.
You're almost there. Is the worst thing you can possibly do.
Exactly. And I don't have Parkinson's, but I was like, I don't need to hear that again. I just need to get to the finish line. Well, John, I do want to go back for a second with your timeline. So you were in the service, you got out. When did you meet your wife?
Well, actually, I went into the service in 1966, just in time for the Vietnam War, of course.
That's when I was born.
Yeah.
Well, in 66, I went into flight training. I got my wings in 67, went to Southeast Asia in 68. Got out of the service in 71, went to Europe for a year, traveled on a motorcycle, had a great time, and rode most of the way across from Morocco to Libya.
Wow.
Came back. And
wasn't it dangerous?
Yes, it was.
But he was a naval aviator, so.
But I've just been through a war, so it's a lot easier than getting shot at in Vietnam. So
in a big plane, yeah.
It was dangerous. In fact, I had a terrific experience in Libya. I got into Tripoli. Of course, when you think about Tripoli, it sounds so far away. In fact, it's part of the Marine Corps hymn, right? From the shores of Tripoli.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I thought it's obviously if they included in a song about the ends of the earth, you know, well, I'm at one pole at least. But I went from Tripoli. I was headed for a town called Homs, Homs, and it's on the north coast of Africa. It's about 180 miles east of Tripoli, toward Benghazi, and it's the site of a old Phoenician ruin that was covered up by sandstorms in the mid 3rd or 4th century BC. It's one of the premier antiquity sites in the world.
Yeah. Wow.
Leptis Magna was the town. It was when it was still a town before it was covered up with sand. And on the way from Tripoli to Leptis Magna, I got on the wrong road. Because Gaddafi had just been put in power in Libya, and he had painted out all the English on the street signs.
Oh.
So that they had either French or Arabic, and I couldn't understand either of them. So I got on the wrong road, ended up in the high Sahara Desert.
Oh no.
And I saw, the last group of people I see coming from the other way was a caravan, 4 Land Rovers in caravan. And I'm thinking, this can't be the right road. But then I looked at the map and I realized that I was 150 miles into a loop that goes into this little town and circles back to the coast. And the little town, unfortunately, wasn't inhabited at that point because it was the dry season in the Sahara. So I'm 120 or 130 miles into a run. My gas tank is good for 100 or 250. And then the sand starts blowing.
Oh no.
And it was close. I got to Homs eventually, and my bike was so inundated with sand that none of the electrical circuits except the ignition. The ignition was the only thing still working. The lights had gone out, the turn signals had gone out.
Oh no.
The sand had penetrated every facet of the bike. And I had to do a field strip of the motorcycle, put it back together before I could drive out of there back to Tripoli. I had intended to go to Benghazi, but I decided it was far enough.
Yeah.
Well, I guess.
Far enough.
What bike were you on?
Fortunately, I bought a BMW in Munich. When I first got to Munich, I had been hitchhiking from Portugal to Spain. We joined up with some friends in Spain when we traveled together for a couple of months, hitchhiking and taking trains and walking. We walked a bit of the old Roman roads in Spain. That was such a delight. To a lovely mountain town called Rondo. It's up in the up above the Costa del Sol, and then took a train through to France to Munich because I was joining a family in Munich that I met earlier. And in Munich, of course, BMW is the manufacturer for automobiles. Then it's headquartered in Munich. And I'd had a BMW car in the States. So I thought I'd buy a BMW bike. And I went to the store and I said, yeah, I'd like to buy a bike. And he said, he pulls out this list of paper and he says, I don't see your name on the list. And I said, what do you mean list? I just want to buy a bike. And as it turned out, the only bikes you could get in Europe for Americans to take back to the States had to be ordered like 6 months in advance, and I hadn't done that. So, but he said, well, we do have one that was ordered and not picked up. I said, great, I'll take a 750 with, blue tank. And they said, no, we have this one 500 that was ordered and not picked up. You can have it or not. So I took it and I rode it all over North Africa and Europe and up to Scandinavia and to England finally.
Wow. Did you ride earlier? Before that?
Yes, I had previous bikes. I had a couple of Hondas, and I enjoyed motorcycles a lot. Yeah, I was fond of them. So,
well, I guess the big question is, did you ship her home?
Yes, I did. In fact, I finally sold it after I was diagnosed with Parkinson's because my doctor, who I shouldn't have listened to, said, give me your pilot's license, sell your motorcycle, you've got Parkinson's disease. And I believed him. I lost my flying license because obviously you can't pass a medical if you're taking levodopa carbidopa. Was a proscribed medication. If you were diagnosed, if you were taking Cinemet, if you were prescribed Cinemet, it legally kept you from flying.
Oh.
Well, it did for 10 years, But then finally, after I ran that marathon, the first marathon, my neurologist said, if you can run a damn marathon, you can probably fly an airplane.
And you're
So
like,
she got me my medical certificate back.
oh,
I
yeah.
actually got my license back for 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
Did you ask her to go find your bike? Your motorcycle?
Unfortunately, when I sold my motorcycle, I had 100,000 miles on my bike.
Wow.
I bought it new and I sold it after 100,000 miles. I wish I'd kept it. It would be a classic today. It would be.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. That's amazing. What a story.
So now, you know, we were talking before we started recording, John, about, you know, how long you had Parkinson's, and you said you actually started counting when you noticed the first symptoms, which would put your self-diagnosis about as long as I've been on the planet. So, so you were having symptoms when you met your wife, when you went to grad school?
I was after I came back from Europe on the bike. I noticed a couple of times that whenever I tried to walk or run, I'd been a runner in high school and college. But whenever I went out to run, when I got back from the trip to Europe, my left foot, my left foot would curl under. And so it was irritating. It kept me from running very comfortably, so I couldn't run very well. That was about 1972, beginning of 1972. And I met my wife about 6 months later, 5 months later, actually. Well, that's a funny story, but I'll save that one for later.
We might need to bring her. We might need to bring her on so she could dispute, or you know, there might be four of us.
Well, I had actually set up a date with a girl that I was going to meet in the English office at the graduate school where I was at Cal State LA. I was going to meet this girl, in the English office. Well, when I got to the English office, there was this better looking girl who actually was a grad student in English and had an office and a job as part of her graduate school experience. And by the time my date got there, I had realized that I was much more interested in the lady I just met. And so I asked her to join us for lunch. Which didn't exactly work out for the first one.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So we ended up getting together, and that was 48 years ago. So
wow, that's amazing.
That's awesome. And how many children do you have?
2. We have a boy and a girl. The doctor suggested that we have one of each to stop while you're behind. And we did. And my son is a 42-year-old sound editor in Hollywood. He does sound mixing for programs like what is the food show? Can't think of the name. He's got quite an IMDb. He actually has a Emmy sitting on his shelf in his.
Wow.
Nice.
He's done a number of programs, but can't think of the. Oh.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, it'll come to me. But my daughter is 40 years old, and she is a librarian. She is actually the corrections librarian for the city of New York.
Wow.
She runs the prison libraries in Rikers Island and other facilities.
That's an important job. Wow.
She has a staff, and they do quite a job of trying to take care of the reading and growth needs of prisoners in the prison system.
That's cool.
Was she an English major as well?
No, my wife actually, after we finished our graduate studies at English, a few years later, my wife decided to become a librarian. So she went to graduate school again, got a master's in library science. So my daughter has a master's in library science as well. So
Got it.
I'm sensing a love for language in your family.
matter of fact, we have thousands of books in our house.
I was gonna say, you must have quite a collection. Yeah.
Yeah, we do actually. I enjoy reading very much.
Is it by Dewey Decimal?
No, it's actually by random.
My favorite.
I remember it was stuck in a corner.
I saw
No,
it
we can
somewhere.
usually find what we're looking for, but not by a systematic approach.
Nope, that's our house too.
That's, do you still run?
Actually, I played golf this morning. Well, not golf, but I went to the driving range this morning with a neighbor, and we knocked the ball around. But I am reduced to shuffling now. I can't call it running anymore. It's the last time I ran actually was that half marathon in March of 2020.
Wow.
And like I said, it was probably the slowest half marathon I've ever done, but it also got me first in my age group for the first time. So it was, I do shuffle and walk, shuffle and walk, shuffle and walk. I don't call it running anymore. At best it's jogging. But I still do it. That is less. Sunday, my two buddies, my running buddies, Mark and Doug, came over and we did an hour out and an hour back. So
that's amazing.
They are quite amazing. Mark Saxenberg decided to join me at the LA Marathon in the second year we had Team Parkinson, and he's been running with me ever since. It was 20 years ago.
Wow.
So Mark and Doug McGlashan joined Mark the next year. So Doug has been with me 18 years or 19 years. And the three of us, if two of us show up, the third's got to be there. It's kept us focused. It's kept us targeted on the next event, the next race, the next run, the next practice, as long as you're looking forward and have something to train for, some reason to get ready for. It's kept us going on for the last 20 years.
All weather, rain or shine.
Hot and cold.
Yeah, I mean, it was over 100 a couple of times in the last couple of months here in LA, and we still went out. Yeah,
amazing.
We try to go as early in the morning as possible because we're all morning people, but also the heat. I can't control the heat very well with Parkinson's because my autonomic nervous system gets out of control. I tend to overheat, sweat too much,
Do you take? Are you on a certain diet for running, or just general?
My idea of a balanced diet is a cookie in each hand. That's balanced. I think it's because we lose our sense of smell, and with Parkinson's, and without a sense of smell, a lot of things just don't taste like they used to. Except sweet and sour are not subject to smell as a reference point. So the sense of sweetness and the sense of sour are intensified, let's say, rather than diminished by that lack of sense of smell. So it tends to make you want to, I mean, I know a lot of people with Parkinson's who have a desire for sweetness.
Yeah, I think most of the people probably watching this show, this video, are probably saying absolutely.
But there's an actual logical explanation for
there
it.
is. That's the best one I've ever heard, John. That the sweet and sour being, not ruled by
Referenced
smell.
by sense of smell.
Yeah.
So
would you go so far to say that the running has had the biggest impact on your progression of Parkinson's, as in slowness of progression?
Well, let me put it this way. Until I met Matt Eagles last year in Tokyo or in Kyoto, I don't think there's anyone that I've known with Parkinson's as long as I've had it that's still alive. He's, I mean, my friend Greg Wasson, I know you probably know Greg.
Yes.
He passed recently. He was one of the long-standing friends. It's hard to think of anyone who's had it as long, who's survived as well. And I think that the only thing I've really done differently is push myself to run as hard and as long as I can. I mean, I don't take any drugs that nobody else can take. I don't eat any special diet that nobody else can take. I don't exercise any harder than other people do. But I've been at it for so long and at it consistently. And of course, having a good attitude helps as well. It's because if you get up each day thinking of what you can do rather than what you can't do, it certainly gets a lot more things done.
Well said. Yeah, that's.
I think I've heard that once or twice from Karl Robb.
Well, that's one of the reasons.
I think he said it more than once.
Was it, John?
Well, you and I have a lot in common. That's for
Yes,
certain.
we do. Yes. I was reading some of your notes, and it was like that sounds like me. I think we had discussions about how we see eye to eye on a lot of
Yeah. You know, I still remember very fondly one day when you and I were at a national Parkinson's meeting of some kind. It was probably a PAN forum. I was getting pretty dyskinetic, and you came over and put your arms around me and put your hands on my shoulder, calmed me down, and it was just the most wonderful feeling. It was the let me tell. There's a story that I haven't told anybody else recently, at least. When I went to Glasgow, Scotland for the second or third Parkinson's Forum, or World Parkinson Congress, there was a gathering one evening. It was a late night. There would have been a long dinner meeting, and then there was a reception late into the evening, and it was about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. And there were four of us still hanging around the site of the meeting. It was Greg Wasson, John Rice from Australia, and Tom, the Englishman.
Yes.
Man, I can't remember his name either.
So Parkinson's UK. You know,
yes.
Oh. We'll clip it in.
Well, Tom and Greg and John and I were standing there. All of us were so dyskinetic. We were excited to be together. And the four of us are waving our arms and waving our heads around like the snakes on Medusa's head, you know. And we thought the only reason the four of us are still standing is because of our wives. Because of, I mean, Becky, Bryce, you've probably met Tom's beautiful wife, Allison, I think her name is.
I think so.
And Greg's AJ, of course.
Yes.
The four of us, the only reason we could be there is because we had that support system to support us. And no, unfortunately, Tom is gone. Greg is gone.
Isaac.
John is gone.
Yeah, Isaac.
Tom Isaac.
Good job.
Isaacs, yeah. Absolutely. So I mean, we've lost key players in this field.
Yes.
And yet I'm so blessed that we're still talking to you.
Yes. Yeah.
We are too. Well, and I want to provide some backstory. I think we did tell you why we called you, John, because we've done 6 interviews so far, I think, during COVID when we started doing these Zoom interviews, but we hadn't interviewed anybody with Parkinson's yet. And it was like, well, okay. I said to Carl, we got to interview with somebody with Parkinson's. I mean, we've had excellent, we've had Ray Dorsey, we had Dr. Stevenson, Carl's, we've had Samantha Ellen here.
I enjoyed the talk with Ray Dorsey.
Yeah.
He's one
And
of
we've
my
had,
heroes. I mean, he and I hooked up for a telemedicine 7 or 8 years ago, or 9 years ago, 10 years ago, when he first got started on it.
yeah.
We go back a long ways.
Yeah. And we chuckled at that when we started the interview, because it was like, we've known him for so long, that the longevity.
Yeah.
But I said to Carl, who's somebody we can interview that is, younger onset, that we feel like, would be somebody that everybody needs to know. And Carl said, John Ball.
Let me tell you, the reason it took me 12 years to get diagnosed with Parkinson's was because the term young onset hadn't been invented yet. In 1971 or 72, when I first went to see the doctor about this cramp in my foot, young onset didn't exist.
Wow.
It was, and that's why it took so long. Nobody was looking for Parkinson's in a 27-year-old.
Well, and I was 23, and so the same line you're too young to have Parkinson's. That's
And Carl had been looking.
Matt Eagles last year or 2 years ago in Tokyo or Kyoto. Matt was diagnosed at 7 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So we know what happens.
We do. We actually met a young woman in Atlanta, that first young onset conference way back in 2003. No, I always get the year wrong. 2000. Yeah, it was 2003.
Yeah.
And she had been diagnosed at 8 years old at Emory. And she was actually studying to be a neuroscientist. So.
Well, my kids were 3 and 4 when I was diagnosed.
Wow.
Now they're middle-aged.
Wow. I think I met someone a long time. I met a 5-year-old that was supposed a long time ago that was supposed to had Parkinson's, but they weren't sure. They couldn't make. They were having a hard time making the diagnosis. But they thought she had Parkinson's at 5. That was the youngest. That's the youngest I'd ever heard of. But
and that would be the juvenile. I don't know if they still even use that term anymore, but juvenile onset Parkinson's disease.
But it's that's amazing.
Well, and that kind of leads us to the thing that we were talking about before we actually started the recording, which was, John, you were commenting how far it has come, the Parkinson's and also drug development, and how far it's come in the time that you've been diagnosed.
Well, when you think about it, when I was diagnosed in 1983, there were 3 drugs that were prescribable for Parkinson's. Thank God one of them was cinnamon, the carbidopa-levodopa. There was Artane was another one that was used. It was anticholinergic disease drug. And it reduced acetylcholine to the level of your reduced dopamine so that you were more in balance, but it kind of made you dumb as well as unmovable. So, Parkinson's is a disease where the dopamine level drops below the acetylcholine level, and you get movement problems. If you get it on the other side, if you lose acetylcholine rather than dopamine, you end up with Alzheimer's. It's a cognitive issues.
Right.
But if you take a reduced amount of dopamine and match it with a reduced amount of choline, then you're both dumb as a rock and can't move. So, Artane did that for you. So actually, when you take Benadryl, for example, it's an anticholinergic. It drops the choline level, acetylcholine level, down to your lowered Parkinson's level, and you feel less Parkinsonian. But you also feel less cognitively sharp.
Yeah, there's a hangover effect.
Yeah, exactly. So there were 3 drugs available at the time that I was diagnosed that were prescribable for Parkinson's disease. Now there are like 35 different versions of dopamine agonists, MAOB inhibitors, COMT inhibitors, amantadine, which is kind of an anticholinergic, but has some other effects as well. It was actually developed as a antiviral drug.
Yeah, flu
yeah,
drug.
yeah.
It kept me from getting anthrax. That's I think it was actually developed for anthrax.
Oh, is
But-
it?
Really?
I
I didn't know that.
I didn't. Oh, I'm not sure of that, but I've seen that someplace. I'm not
Oh.
sure.
Well,
whether it's accurate or
I think it
But it-
saved
but I-
Carl
But
from the
there are
flu.
5 or 6 different whole categories of drugs now available to treat Parkinson's symptoms,
Yeah.
not to treat the disease itself. The
No.
only thing we know treats the disease itself is exercise.
That's,
And exercise has been the one thing that I did differently from all my friends. So it's been a tremendously valuable experience for me. I mean, no, you wouldn't catch a doctor, a neurologist today say, go home and find a comfortable chair.
Yeah.
That would not fly.
no.
They don't, I mean, they've learned what I've learned in the same period of time.
John, I was looking through some documentation on you, and one of the things you said was, can make a difference if you don't show up.
You know, I say that so often that my kids probably are tired of it by now, but I think that I have been very fortunate over the years that I have been able to show up, and it's the only thing that you can do that really. Well, let's back up a second. I'm struggling here.
Take your time.
I have been very blessed over the years to make a difference by being there when the things go down. I mean, there's a great song in the Broadway musical Hamilton. It's called "In the Room Where It Happens." You know, I want to be there in the room where it happens. And if you're not there, you don't know what goes down. You just don't. And if you can't be there to help someone else, if you can't be there to make a difference, you have to be there to make it happen. So I've been very fortunate that I've been able to meet with people, talk with people, share my experience with people. It's been a real blessing.
I have a follow-up.
Okay.
So John, I think one of the things that, as we've done what you've done, which is go around and speak to groups and whatnot, groups and conferences and symposiums, etc. The one question I always hear is, how do you balance it? Like, how do you set the priorities, for being where it happens? A lot of people struggle with holding their job and cope in living with Parkinson's. Some of them have trouble with their family. They end up in divorce situations because of the Parkinson's. So how would you say, what was your approach to handling all that and balancing it?
I have both an advantage and a disadvantage in that my mother-in-law, Edna's mother, had Parkinson's from the time she was, my wife was 11 years old when her mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So Edna had Parkinson's in her experience before I met her. I mean, I met my wife when she was 21, 22, and her mother had already had Parkinson's for a while. So, of course, now her experience was my wife's parents were survivors of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe. They were from Poland, went through the Holocaust, came to Canada in 1948, and lived in Montreal. And my wife was raised in Montreal, Canada, born in 1950. And then her mother was diagnosed when she was 11 years old. In 1961, at the time Hannah was diagnosed, there wasn't a single drug for Parkinson's.
Nope.
Spinomec had not been invented yet.
Mm.
Coetzee had not even given the first patient levodopa. So it was, there was nothing to do for her. And her life eventually was tied to a comfortable chair. I mean, she was essentially put in a chair because every time she tried to do things, she would fall and break a hip or break an arm, wrist. So her experience was very different from my experience. At the time I got diagnosed, I said, I'm not going to let that happen. Not going to get tied to a chair. In fact, I was very fortunate that I went to work the day after I was diagnosed, and I told my boss that the reason I can't keep up with you as we walk across the parking lot, the reason I keep wearing the toes off my shoes because I'm dragging my left foot, is Parkinson's disease. And he said, is it going to kill you? I said, no. And he said, well, then get back to work.
And what were you doing at the time, John? What was your
I
occupation?
was a technical writer for American Honda. I was writing service manuals for the Honda Motor Company.
Oh, wow.
And I got back to work. And in fact, I was able to work another 19 years.
Wow.
But then I had to. I mean, my kids were, like I said, my kids were 3 and 4 years old when I was diagnosed. So.
Well, that brings up an interesting question. I have a lot of friends a few friends who are hesitant to tell their loved ones or their employee did you even thought about not telling?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what my family thought when I was diagnosed. That's an interesting question. I know that. I'm sort of lost here.
No, take a moment.
Sure.
That's fine. I'll give a little background while you're thinking. We have some friends that have been diagnosed for many years. I would even say upwards of 5 to 6 years, and they still haven't disclosed to some people in their life. And I've watched them struggle to hide it.
Well, that was the odd thing in my family. When I was diagnosed, I was able to tell my boss at work. When I was diagnosed, I was able to make that adjustment on my softball team and to various people that I was in contact. But I couldn't tell my parents-in-law because they weren't prepared to see me. Their son-in-law with the same problem that had me. So we kept it secret from them for about 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
And it was tough. But fortunately, my kids grew up not knowing any different. I mean, it's dad is dad, regardless of whether he's got Parkinson's or not.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any problem telling my kids that we had a problem, but it was, I think that they just accept me for, the way I am.
Well, you have so much knowledge. How would you advise someone newly diagnosed, and someone who's had Parkinson's for a long time. Your pearls of wisdom.
Well, I think that what I like to tell people now is that if you've just been recently diagnosed with Parkinson's, it's the best time in the history of mankind to be diagnosed. Because we know so much more about it than we did 10, 20 years. We have so many more drug treatment options. We have so many more skilled physical therapists. We have so many more skilled care facilities. It's the best time ever if you've got Parkinson's. We're closer to a cure than we've ever been. We're closer to better treatments than we've ever been. So it's not something to be upset about. You know, I know that I could be gone tomorrow, just like any of us, but it certainly wouldn't. It won't be because of Parkinson's, although certainly Parkinson's has a hand in it and everything else you do. But I think it's a great time to be part of the Parkinson's community, because the community is so strong, and the relationship between those of us who suffer the disease itself and the researchers and the doctors, that relationship is much stronger than it's ever been before. I've had the opportunity to participate in numerous clinical trials and studies over the years, and the relationship between the researchers and the patients is stronger than it's ever been. And the quality of research being done is as high as it's ever been.
Well, I will say props to you and Karl and all the folks who have done an amazing job bridging the gap between the scientists and the patients. I think it's been everybody's combined advocacy that has allowed for that. I mean, I'm still struck, and Karl is too, about the time we met at a PAN forum. We met a scientist who was a bench scientist who had never met anybody with Parkinson's, had been studying Parkinson's for years, but had never met anybody. They knew Parkinson's in a dish. They did not know Parkinson's in the flesh.
They were so excited. So they were so excited to meet someone with Parkinson's.
Yeah, Karl, you were so excited to meet them. We were like,
yeah,
and we appreciated them so much because they studied it in the dish. But I think it was hard for us to imagine somebody who would be so passionate about a Parkinson's in a dish. You know, we're so passionate about it in the flesh. So,
well, I'm glad that the world is changing, and although it may be changing in some ways that we don't like, as far as the Parkinson's and the relationship between the medical community and the research community and the patient community, I think it's the best it's ever been.
This has been really enlightening and really entertaining and really enjoyable talking to John. We'll have after this again.
Anytime, I'm up for it.
Well, thank you for being a wonderful example, John,
Yes.
and thank you for being in the evangelist. You know, I see you as an evangelist for Parkinson's in our community. So very thankful for your time and your passion and your wisdom.
Yes.
Sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much. It's
Very
been
valuable.
It's been fun talking with you.